Okay guys, good morning. So today we're going to do our tutorial on how to stage a professional interview. We've prepared for this, we've got our shot list and our schedule, we're ready to go. Let's just kind of go over things a little bit before we start. Lighting, that's what we're going to cover first. Then we're going to go into audio, right? Then next is going to be the camera techniques that someone will want to use if they're doing an interview. And then finally, we'll talk about what it takes to be a good interviewer, how you have a conversation flow and get the sound bites that you need to get from that person, okay? So are we ready to go? Yeah. Let's do it. So before we get into lighting, let's talk a couple location tips. Put your interview in an area that's natural to them. If you're interviewing a business owner, for example, put them in their office. Watch out for loud appliances like air conditioners or other things that are going to mess up your audio track. And don't put your interview in front of a window, because with your exposure, the brightness in the camera, the window is going to be all blown out. It's going to be completely white. It's not going to look very good. Okay, so with lighting, we've got Mohammed here just finalizing our last light, and our interview is going to be seated right about where Joe, our camera operator, is standing right now. And these three lights that you see around, not these ones here which are lighting us for this tutorial, but these three soft boxes are lighting our subject. So Mohammed, tell us about this three light setup here.
Okay, just in here we have a key light.
The key, right.
Yeah, this light is the main source of light.
Yeah, it's going to be our brightest source, right?
Yeah.
And what about this one over here?
This one is the full light. This light who falling shadow on
Yeah,
subject.
and it's good to have a little bit of shadow.
Yeah,
you don't want a complete washout of the face. So that's why you can see our key light, our main light source, has two lights, and our fill light is only one. That's so that we'll have one side with a little bit of shadow, a little bit of definition. That's what you want. What about this one up here?
That one is the backlight. This one working to separate subject from the background.
Right. And it'll also give them a nice kind of little highlight, which looks good
Yes,
too.
correct. Yeah.
Now there is something else you need to consider when you're lighting, and that's color temperature. We'll get into it more with camera, but when you're dealing with that, you have to be careful and set your color temperature settings in your camera to the same as your light. So we'll cover that a little bit more later. We're here with Chris. He's going to be doing some of the audio recording today. Chris, can you tell me a little bit about the setup that we've got going here?
Well, we got our wireless lavalier mics, and they're going to be capturing the audio of the subjects, and those are being run into the Zoom recorder app in my left hand right here.
Okay, so we're talking about recording audio externally from the camera. Why not just use the camera mic, for example?
Well, the camera mic just doesn't have the best quality audio possible.
Yeah, and we'll actually let the viewer listen to that right now. So what you're hearing right now is the actual microphone that comes on the camera. We're using Canon DSLRs, and you're hearing that it's very thin, it's ambient, it's not the quality sound that you get from something like a lavalier. Also, I should mention that we could be running these microphones right into the camera, but these cameras are not necessarily designed to capture quality audio. Something like this Zoom recorder is going to do a much better job of that, going to give us a much better signal. Okay, Chris, what about something like a shotgun mic? We can see in our wide shot here that Jen actually has this shotgun on a boom pole for us, and why not just use something like that?
Well, the shotgun mic is all right sometimes, but you can't always get as close as you'd like to your subject without the mic being in the shot, so the lavalier would be a better choice for an interview setup.
Yeah, and we'll let them hear that as well. What you're hearing right now is the shotgun mic. You can hear it's better than the camera mic, but it's still not ideal, and having that lavalier nice and close just gives you that nice, rich, full-bodied sound. Now, quick note on mic placement, make sure that your interview is going to wear some sort of collared shirt, because then you can clip the wireless lav to them, and make sure you place it nice and close to them. Don't have it down here. You're not going to get a very good signal. Okay, lastly, Chris, since we are recording audio separately from the camera, we're going to need to sync the audio to the video. How do we do that?
Well, we're going to use the slate that you have in your hand, and the clap from that is going to peak the audio file, and that is where we'll sync up the audio and video.
Right, so every time we roll, we'll call what's on the slate and clap it, just like the movies. So we're almost ready to shoot our interview. We've got Mohammed seated in here, just temporarily, so we can make some final camera adjustments, and that's what Joe's working on now. Now, Joe, there's a lot to consider here with the camera. Let's keep it kind of basic, but the first thing I want to talk about is color temperature. I had mentioned that when we were talking about lighting. Just show us, without going too much into it, just show us what it would look like if the color temperature settings in the camera did not match the color temperature of our light source?
Sure. If you see here, if I crank it up much too high, Mohammed gets too hot, too red and orange. If I crank it down much too low, you can see he becomes very blue, much too cold.
Right, so the process of this is what we call white balancing, and really what you're doing is just getting it so that the image in the camera, the colors, match what you would normally see with your eye, because we don't want it to be too warm or too cool, what we just saw. Okay, now Joe, talk about the framing that you have here and some of the things to look for.
Sure thing. Well, the first thing I look for is headroom. If he doesn't have enough headroom, it cuts off the top of his head. And if he has too much headroom, he just looks like a floating head.
Right, and certainly those extreme examples don't look good, but as a camera operator, you do have to be careful that you don't just kind of go slightly off of where you should be. Even just having headroom like that, just not quite enough, is going to look not great, and having just slightly too much is not going to look great. Certainly something like that really does not look good, but once you find that right headroom, you're going to be good to go. Now what about lead room or nose room in this scenario?
Well, nose room is the space in front of Mohammed. This should give him looking space. So if I cut it off, it just looks almost like he's staring at a wall. There's a lot of negative space behind him.
Right, and what Joe's done is he has placed Mohammed more toward the left side of the screen, but what he hasn't done is something like this. That would be giving him just a little bit too much, so we'll place that back where it should be. Okay, now what about exposure, Joe? Very basic understanding of that. What's that?
Exposure is the camera's light. You see, if I crank it down, it appears like the room's too dark.
Or what we would call underexposed.
If I crank it up too high, it becomes too bright.
Or overexposed. And tell us about ISO.
Well, ISO, for example, if you had a room that was too dark, which I'll do just like this, if you crank it up, it raises the camera's sensitivity to light. The only problem with it is it looks good on your viewfinder, but the moment it comes up on the screen, you can see there's a lot of grain.
Right, so that's something to be careful of. If your ISO is too high, you're really forcing brightness into the camera, and that's going to cause some signal problems. You're going to get grain and noise, and it's not going to look great. So a low ISO is desirable. You want a low as ISO as you can get, and that's going to make the picture as sharp as possible. So the last thing I want to show you guys is a frame rate comparison. We're shooting in 24 frames per second on this camera over here. That's the film standard. It's the traditional film standard. It has a good look. We like it. You use it for movies and music videos, but also for HD video and commercials, and your typical drama television shows are all going to be shot in that. What we have over here, though, is 60 frames per second, and you can see it looks a little bit different. It looks more like a home movie. You could use that for a reality show or a documentary. It has that much more realistic, like you're really there kind of feel. We can also use it for slow motion, right?
That's right.
So it's good to have some hair and makeup people on set for your interview. Even if you can't get a professional hair and makeup artist, maybe you have a friend that can do that, or maybe the client has someone that they know that can do that work for them. I think I'm good to go. So your interview isn't going to look in the camera, they're going to look off camera at your interviewer. And Jen's here, she's a good interviewer. Now Jen, this is such an important part of the process. All of the technical stuff that we've gone over today, if the conversation doesn't work, then the interview really kind of falls apart. So what to you is the most important part of being an interviewer?
What's important to me is to make sure that the person I'm interviewing is comfortable with me. So before the interview actually begins, I'll sit down and I'll kind of go over the topics that we're going to be discussing. That way there's no curveball thrown at them. And basically I just want to kind of get to know them a little bit on a personal level, and that makes people more comfortable. So it'll flow better as we get into the interview.
Right, and I think what you're talking about is preparation. The preparation is the important part, and the environment that you create for the person. But I think part of creating that environment, it's also important to almost come to the table a little underprepared. And what I mean by that is coming to the table without knowing absolutely everything about the person and about the topic, because I think if you're genuinely curious about what you're asking the person about, those questions are going to be more genuine. The conversation is going to be a real conversation, because if you're interested and you're engaged, it's going to make the interview engaged and interested to be a part of that conversation.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think that you should deliver the questions beforehand before you even get on camera, because when you are talking to somebody and they already know what you're going to ask, it sounds scripted. So you really don't want to have too much information. You do want to seem genuinely interested in what they're saying, and you don't want to already know the answers.
Yeah, and I think if someone wants to do interviews a lot and wants to interview people, we're not just talking about, you know, the 60 minutes expose kind of stuff, but just interviewing a client about their business. That part of the process, beyond, if someone really wants to be well-rounded, of course, camera, lighting, audio, all the things we've talked about today are so important. But if you can be that person that can sit down and have a conversation with someone and get those sound bites, you're going to be so much stronger than the person that can't really do that, because they're always going to need that person to come in and do that for them. Okay, thanks, Jen.
Thank you.
All right, guys, that's it. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. We'd like you to watch some of the other ones. We have some links in the descriptions below. We've got a tutorial on camera and depth of field. We've got one that goes a little bit deeper into lighting. We also have one from our recording instructor about miking a drum set. And then go check out some of the other videos on our YouTube channel. We've got lots of cool stuff to watch. But don't forget to check out thenewschool.us and enroll today. We'll see you in class.